Okay, thanks. It's great to be here. A real pleasure. So yeah, nice to see so many friends, colleagues, collaborators, funders in the audience. Thanks for coming. So yeah, today I'm going to talk about beyond citations, measuring the economic and scientific impact of UniProt. Just in case any of you zone out during the talk, let me give you the headline sort of numbers. So we collaborated with some economists. They did an extremely in-depth cost-benefit analysis. And in the end, it showed essentially that for every euro that you sort of invest in these resources, you get 20 to 30 times that euros back in sort of increased productivity and benefits. Okay, you can probably start reading your email now. So I'm head of protein sequence resources at EMBL EBI, and we've already heard various people presenting from there. And so it's one of the world leading sources of public biomedical data. We have a bunch of great resources that are available. And I'm particularly interested in genes, genomes, and RNA. So I look after resources there, and also in the area of proteins. So I can sort of knowledgeably answer any questions there, but point you towards other people in the other areas. Now, Eleni already told you a little bit about measuring economic impact. And I think the Begri report was really, really influential. I think this was the first time that in this field, we'd started to do an economic analysis. And when you go to government and funders, these are sort of somehow can be much more persuasive in language that they understand. So I think that was a really important step forward. The returns on investment are pretty astronomical. And so I think give a really good, in fact, they're so astronomical, I think some of the people who look at these figures were really surprised at just how high the returns on investment were. So we were really happy when I think last year the folks at Elixir approached us and said, well, would you like to do an economic analysis of the UniProt database? We said, yes, please. And in particular, they were going to focus on that part of impact that we don't have a good handle on. So we have a really good handle on sort of academic impacts, you know, publications and our users. But then there's this sort of darker side of industry use where, you know, papers don't tend to get published. So we don't have much handle on that. And so they were going to really focus on that. I think most people here probably know, but so UniProt is, you know, world-leading protein sequence and annotation database. And we make all of this information freely available through an international consortium, PIR in the US, led by Kathy Wu, Swiss Institute of Bioinformatics in Geneva, led by Alan Bridge, who sat in the back corner, and myself at EMBL EBI. And just to say, we really appreciate all the funding that we get from NIH, EMBL, and the Swiss Secretariat for Education, Research and Innovation. So this work was part of the Pathos project, which was a European funded project. You can see the different collaborators here. And this was one of the case studies applying a methodology that had been worked out previously. So this is just a kind of an overview of the major sort of way, the tools that were used in this analysis. So we're looking at the right-hand side here. So we looked, or our collaborators at CSIL who actually did the analysis, looked at the usage and costs of UniProt. We have that data available. A lot of user survey data was very important, as with the Begri report. But then there were more detailed interviews with respondents, a detailed citation and patent analysis, and then pulling in focus groups, and particularly to look at some of the sort of the economic aspects and benefits and really drill down into the details. So we saw a much prettier slide of an impact sort of pathway logic from Eleni. And just to say that this analysis is focusing on the short-term outcomes, but not all of them. And just some of the long-term benefits. This is a really difficult area to measure. The short-term ones are much simpler to measure. Won't go into any more detail, but if you really want to know more about this, you can read the 90-page report, which explains in very great detail all of this. So in terms of the surveys, we got a really good response from industry. That's shown on the right. So 20% of our respondents were from industry, primarily pharma, chemical industry, but also a smattering of other sort of areas, agriculture, food industry, and so on. So that was very nice to see, because that was the area that we were, had the least handle on. In terms of the approach, then I'm going to have 3 slides on the scope, identifying a counterfactual, and estimating our user population. So we really focused on UniProt, our data and our usage. What we didn't focus on is the sort of cost and benefits related to the data that goes into UniProt. It pulls, this relies on data pulled in from 100 other databases. It relies on the science that was done to make all the data. That's to try and keep this manageable, we ignore that. There's also aspects of reuse. So we're reusing data from these other databases, and many other databases are using this. And so we miss all those aspects of when we measure the impact, the fact that maybe Flybase has some of our data in and people are citing Flybase. So we just make this assumption that this all equals out in the long run. Imperfect, but I think much more research is needed on reuse. I think this is a sort of not well understood aspect of impact assessment. So identification of counterfactual, it would really be useful if you had a time machine. You could go back 30 years and, I don't know, run Amos Bayrock over with a bus and find out what happened if there was no Swissprot and then UniProt. But we don't have that. So identifying the counterfactuals is super challenging, as Eleni suggested. This analysis suggested that actually there was no single comparable alternative to UniProt because of the way we integrate data from so many places. So yeah, this makes this challenging, and I think sort of agrees with Eleni's point of counterfactuals weakening in this very open ecosystem. But I think that's one of the great advantages of our current ecosystem. So we had to estimate our user population. So from our Google Analytics and other measures, we have about 800,000 unique IPs accessing UniProt per month. Begri gave some techniques, methodology to work out, well, how do you go from IPs to actual people? And so this comes down to a number approximately around 100,000 unique real people is the estimate. But honestly, I think this has very wide error bars. So costs and benefits. So we have listed here. So this, the setup costs, salary costs, buying the computers, all these sorts of things are in there. Actually, also it goes into detail about user costs. How much does it cost to train? The time to access the resource. Also, we get some contributions for the community, although relatively small in economic terms. These were also factored in. And then on the benefits, we have things like transaction costs, access cost savings, and the largest here is the labor cost savings. It's the amount of time you save by looking at UniProt entries. And so you don't have to read a whole bunch of literature. You can just sort of get on. You have a huge, high throughput screen. You can just analyze that and go and look at the hits and work things out quickly. So let's zoom into the costs. So this is the running costs for the last 12, 13 years. And so it comes in at sort of an average of about 13 million euros per year, which supports all of the staff and the resources and so on. And that funding comes jointly from NIH, CERI, and EMBL. Then we want to work out the user, how much does it cost for the users and their time? And so use something called the avoided cost method, where you work out, need to know the average time 100,000 users spend using UniProt, what their average hourly salary is, and apparently you can. There are data resources and so on that you can go to estimate these things in a global way, and then multiply these two things together. So you can get the cost of the time people spend using UniProt, and then we make estimates about how much time do they think they saved by using UniProt, and work out the benefits that way. So from the survey, we can see how much time do users spend. Many users in a week just flick in for a small amount of time, get the information they need, and jump back out again. Quite a significant proportion, almost a quarter, spend 3 hours on UniProt each week. Okay, there's an incredible amount of detail here. I just haven't got time to go into all of this. So I'm just going to jump straight to the results. Okay, ta-da. Okay, so total costs, operational costs, about 14.6 million euros per year. And then, can I get the mouse to do something? Yeah, kind of. So then we come down to here, and the overall total benefits, okay, we come up with these pretty astronomical numbers. So 373 million is the lower bound estimate, and 565 million is the upper bound. And so this is 22 times greater than the cost, and this is 35 times greater than the cost. I've been instructed by my economic friends that I'm not allowed to say that this is a cost-benefit ratio, because we haven't included the setup costs of setting up UniProt 20 plus years ago, because we don't have the data. Unfortunately, yeah, we just don't have that data. So I can't say that, but it is really. Okay, I can't say that. Okay, so that's the sort of the first part of the analysis. We haven't really talked about any of these long-term benefits yet, so I wanted to talk about that. And that's been done in two ways, by analyzing citations and analyzing patents. And so this complements the cost-benefit analysis. When doing these analyses, generally we're searching through databases of literature and patents, and we are searching for a number of different keywords. There are many different ways that people might refer to UniProt. And so we've kind of listed them all here, and we check all of those possibilities. The data sources were open air for publications. Great, but the numbers are much lower than if I go and look at Google Scholar, just saying. And Lens and Orbis for the patents. I think Orbis IP, well, no, I'll talk more in a moment about that. So here are the open air publications. By this database, there have been 6,700 citations to the papers describing UniProt, and you can see how this has grown over time. The team went and did looking at the fields of science of those citations. So medical and health sciences was the largest share. I'm sorry, this is completely unreadable, but what we see is a very broad range of fields of study that UniProt is used in. I won't go into any more detail about that, because essentially that's the sort of more of the academic side. We really understand that quite well. The patent analysis is what I think is really interesting and novel. So there were two approaches, a narrow approach and a broad approach. The narrow approach, which is what the economists did first, where they just looked for UniProt mentioned in the title or the abstract of the patent. And we came back and said, no. That's not good. You have to go and really look in the patent for mentions in the whole claim. And so that's the extended analysis. So this is the narrow approach. So just looking at this sort of the ones that really are highly focused on UniProt. So there are 164 patent applications, and they fall into 78 distinct patent families. Blah, blah, blah. So these are important, and UniProt is the focus for these. But what's kind of important is that then these other people build on these patents. And so here we see the citation patents with the UniProt mentioning patents in orange, and then in blue are all the patents that are using those. So we can see how the knowledge and the use sort of grows out. Okay, so let's look at this more extended approach. So this is looking anywhere in the claim for mentions of UniProt, SwissProt, and all these synonyms. So now we get some serious numbers, right? So we've got 180,000 patents belonging to almost 45,000 patent families. And again, this is growing over time. Honestly, I don't know whether that's because the patent literature is growing over time or whether UniProt is becoming more important. Looking into this data, I think what this really shows is, oh, I better speed up, that UniProt is really a critical way of identifying the objects of patents, of really nailing down what the thing is that people are talking about. And I think that's one of the major uses. And so a bit more analysis was done to look at the technological sectors. And also, it's interesting to see that there are over 10,000 entities that filed patents mentioning UniProt. And we have the top 5 here: Genentech, Hoffmann La Roche, Novozymes, Novartis, and Inserm. So yeah, it's very industry focused. We can also look at, so building out from those patents that match UniProt, and then look at the sort of the next layer of things that build on those. And we can, you can't see, but I'll tell you that the fields of study or research really broaden out in this sort of next layer out. So UniProt is critical here, but it builds out into all sorts of really much wider sectors. I will just mention that UniProt actually was shown to be very important in establishing spin-offs, and actually our respondents were saying for many of them that they just couldn't have made their spin-off without UniProt, which was, yeah, really fascinating. Okay, 2 minutes till we finish. Okay, so I'm just going to skip the conclusions because hopefully you've been paying attention, and just say thank you to the UniProt teams at ECCB, SIB, and PIR for their really amazing work. I'd like to thank our funders again, and particularly the CSEL team, the economists who did this work, for taking on board our feedback and making, giving us a real insight into how UniProt is used by both academia and industry. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. I think we have time for one or two questions. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I'm interested in this citations and in this mentioning in the literature. Have you had also a closer look into how UniProt is actually mentioned in the literature? Because we did the same for example, for the Brenda database. And then sometimes people mention Brenda, but they're saying, yeah, we could not use Brenda for that. And they're citing Brenda, but they did not actually use it, which I thought quite astonishing.
Okay, so one bit of analysis, it wasn't part of this report, but you can find it. We, as an ODSS-funded admin supplement, we wrote this tool, which is in Google Colab, which you can do metrics for any database. And that was published in Bioinformatics Advances. Maybe I should have mentioned that. And there, what it will do is for the citations or the mentions, it will go and look in which section of the paper they were mentioned. So you can see, is UniProt mentioned in the methods, or is, Brenda, is it just in the introduction or the results and so on. So I think that's one way of starting to look into how is it used. And when we look across different databases, you really do see very different patterns. So PFAM, which I know and love, it's mentioned in methods quite a bit. But actually a lot in the introduction. So people, were mentioning it as you can do this with PFAM or something, even if they're not using it. So we're happy.
Yeah, thanks. That was a really interesting talk. I wonder if there's any way you can use these kinds of data, or are you using these kinds of data to kind of direct future developments? Like, can you kind of quantify what is the maximum value thing to do next?
So we haven't really thought about that, but yeah, it makes particular sense. I think from this economic analysis, it's kind of difficult to see how to do that, but we do have the survey data. And so we can, again, as Eleni said, we can split that by different user types and so on. So we might get some more insights there.
Yeah, one more question. Okay.
Yeah, Alex, thanks for sharing this details of the economic impact study. It's really eye-opening. I just have a question about two numbers. On one page earlier, you were saying that on average, the funding to UniProt was about 13 million euros per year over a very long period of time. And also in the study later on that the number listed was at 14.6.7 per year. The cost is like that. So there seems to be a like 1.5 million euros gap deficit.
Okay, I suspect that that's either I said the numbers wrong, but I believe that they should be consistent. So I just have to check. But thank you for pointing that out.
No, I'm not
Yeah.
I'm not trying to point out the
Yeah.
numbers too much. I'm just wondering whether this deficit was this any way to whether you have done something and then try to cover the gap.
No, it's nothing like that. I think it's just, yes, could be rounding errors. I'd have to go back. Is one a dollar number? I'm not sure. I just need to go back and check what the difference is. Because usually we tend to talk about these things in dollars, millions of dollars. And in this analysis, it's done in euros. So it could be something as simple as that.
Okay, that brings us to the end of the session. Thank you, Alex.